The moment Jonathan Miller saw his CEO walking toward him across the crowded restaurant, his heart nearly stopped. He had spent 3 exhausting years trying to keep his private life separate from his job, and the last thing he needed was for Victoria Bennett, the most intimidating woman in the company, to discover that he was sitting at a table waiting for a blind date. So Jonathan did the only thing his exhausted mind could think of. He stood up, grabbed his coat, and quietly headed for the exit. He was almost through the door when a soft voice behind him made his entire body freeze. "Jonathan, where are you going?" He turned slowly. Victoria was standing only a few feet away. Then she leaned closer and whispered the words that would change both their lives forever. "I'm your blind date. If you believe that kindness can heal broken hearts, that second chances can change lives, and that love sometimes arrives when we least expect it, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. You never know when a simple story might remind someone that their life isn't over just because their heart has been hurt." Jonathan had never imagined his life would become so complicated. At 38, he was a single father raising his 8-year-old daughter, Grace, in a small rented house outside Charlotte, North Carolina. His wife had passed away 4 years earlier after a sudden illness, leaving Jonathan with a little girl who still slept with her mother's old blue scarf tucked beneath her pillow. Grace was the center of his world. Every morning, Jonathan packed her lunch, braided her hair badly because he still hadn't mastered the technique, checked her homework, and drove her to school before heading downtown to work at Bennett Technologies. He wasn't rich. He wasn't particularly ambitious anymore. He simply wanted stability. His salary paid the bills, kept food on the table, and allowed Grace to attend the small private school her mother had once dreamed of sending her to. Jonathan worked as a senior operations manager, and although he was respected by his colleagues, he had learned to stay invisible whenever possible. His CEO, Victoria Bennett, was brilliant, demanding, and almost impossible to read. She had built the company from a tiny startup into one of the most successful technology firms in North Carolina. Employees whispered about her in hallways, describing her as cold, ruthless, and completely married to her career. Jonathan had never spoken to her about anything personal. As far as he knew, she barely knew his name. That was why, when his friend Marcus convinced him to try a blind date, Jonathan nearly laughed. Dating felt like something people did when they had free time, and Jonathan had no free time. His evenings belonged to Grace. His weekends belonged to grocery shopping, laundry, soccer practice, school projects, and helping his daughter build cardboard castles on the living room floor. Still, Marcus had insisted that Jonathan couldn't spend the rest of his life hiding behind fatherhood. He had arranged the date with a woman he claimed was kind, successful, and completely unaware of Jonathan's complicated past. Jonathan reluctantly agreed. The restaurant was elegant but comfortable, a beautiful place overlooking the Charlotte skyline. Jonathan arrived 10 minutes early, wearing the only suit he owned that still fit properly. He sat at the table, checked his phone, and stared nervously at the entrance. He had just begun wondering whether he should leave when a familiar figure appeared across the room. Victoria Bennett, his boss, his CEO, the woman whose approval could affect his entire career. Jonathan immediately assumed she was there for a business meeting. Then he noticed she wasn't looking around for a client. She was walking directly toward him. Panic took over. He imagined every possible disaster. Maybe someone had discovered an error in his department. Maybe there was an emergency at the company. Maybe she needed him to return to the office. Whatever the reason, Jonathan didn't want Victoria Bennett anywhere near his personal life. He stood, picked up his coat, and moved toward the door. That's when she stopped him. "Jonathan, where are you going?" He turned, embarrassed, and tried to explain that he had misunderstood something. But Victoria simply looked at him for several seconds, and the intimidating CEO suddenly seemed nervous herself. Then she whispered, "I'm your blind date." Jonathan stared at her as if she had spoken another language. For the first time in 3 years, he saw Victoria Bennett without the armor she wore at work. She wasn't the terrifying CEO. She was a woman standing in an expensive red dress, nervously holding a small handbag, wondering whether the man sitting across from her would give her a chance. The truth slowly came out. Victoria's younger sister, Rebecca, had been friends with Marcus. Rebecca had arranged the blind date after learning that both Jonathan and Victoria were lonely and stubborn enough to avoid dating on their own. Neither of them had known the identity of the other. Jonathan almost laughed from sheer disbelief. He couldn't decide whether to sit down or run. Victoria noticed his hesitation and gently told him that if he wanted to leave, she wouldn't blame him. She even admitted that she had considered leaving herself. She wasn't comfortable with dating someone who worked for her, and she certainly hadn't expected the man from the photograph Rebecca showed her to be one of her own employees. But there was something in Jonathan's expression that made her stay. He sat down. The first 20 minutes were painfully awkward. Jonathan talked about Grace. Victoria talked about the company. Jonathan apologized for talking too much about his daughter. Victoria surprised him by saying she actually wanted to hear more. As the evening continued, something unexpected happened. They began laughing. Jonathan discovered that Victoria hated being called Ms. Bennett outside the office. Victoria discovered that Jonathan could burn even scrambled eggs. He told her about Grace's obsession with astronomy. Victoria admitted that she had never seen a meteor shower because she had spent most of her adult life inside offices and airports. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt like something inside him had loosened. But the next morning, reality returned. At work, everything was different. Jonathan couldn't look at Victoria without remembering the woman from the restaurant. Victoria couldn't walk past his office without remembering his nervous smile. Neither knew how to behave. Then rumors started. Someone had seen them together. Within days, whispers spread through the company that Jonathan was having a secret relationship with the CEO. Jonathan became terrified. He had already lost one family. He couldn't risk losing the only job that kept Grace secure. So he did what he had always done when life became painful. He withdrew. He avoided Victoria. He stopped answering her personal messages. He asked Marcus to tell Rebecca that the date had been a mistake. He convinced himself that he had imagined the connection because he was lonely. Victoria was hurt, but she didn't chase him. Instead, she watched from a distance as Jonathan worked harder than ever. Then one Friday afternoon, everything fell apart. Jonathan received a call from Grace's school. She had collapsed during class. He left the office immediately. At the hospital, he found his daughter sitting in a bed with an IV in her arm. Doctors said it appeared to be a severe infection, but they needed additional tests. Jonathan sat beside her, holding her tiny hand. He had faced difficult days before, but nothing compared to seeing fear in his daughter's eyes. Grace asked whether she was going to be okay. Jonathan smiled, even though tears were burning behind his eyes, and told her that she would be. But after stepping into the hospital hallway, he finally broke. He leaned against the wall and covered his face. He didn't hear Victoria approaching. She had learned about Grace from Marcus and had driven to the hospital without telling anyone. When Jonathan looked up, he was ashamed that she had seen him crying. Victoria didn't ask him to explain. She simply sat beside him. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then she quietly told him that he didn't have to carry everything alone. Jonathan tried to argue that she was his CEO and that their relationship was already complicated. Victoria reminded him that outside the office, she was simply Victoria, a woman who cared. That sentence broke something inside him. Jonathan finally told her the truth about his fear. He wasn't afraid of love. He was afraid of losing it. He had already watched his wife disappear from his life, and he couldn't survive another goodbye. Victoria listened. Then she shared her own secret. Her father had died when she was young, leaving her mother to raise her alone. Victoria had spent her entire life believing that becoming successful would protect her from ever feeling helpless again. She built the company because she believed money and power could prevent pain. But they couldn't. She was lonely too. The following weeks changed everything. Grace recovered. Victoria slowly became part of their lives, not as Jonathan's CEO, but as someone who showed up. She attended Grace's school science fair. She sat on the floor helping her build a model of the solar system. She learned how Grace liked her pancakes and which bedtime stories she requested when she was nervous. Jonathan watched it all from a distance. He saw the woman his employees feared become someone who remembered that Grace hated raisins. One evening, Grace looked at her father and asked whether Victoria could come to her next soccer game. Jonathan smiled. He realized he no longer wanted to run. But there was still one obstacle. The company board discovered the relationship. Victoria was told she had to choose between protecting her position and continuing to see Jonathan. Jonathan expected her to choose the company. Instead, Victoria made a decision that stunned everyone. She voluntarily changed Jonathan's reporting structure, moved him into a new division, and removed herself from every decision involving his career. She did it publicly so nobody could accuse him of receiving special treatment. Then she told the board that Jonathan deserved the same professional respect he had earned before she ever knew him personally. For the first time, Jonathan understood that Victoria wasn't trying to rescue him. She was standing beside him. Months later, on a warm Saturday morning, Jonathan took Grace to a park overlooking the Charlotte skyline. Victoria was waiting beneath a large oak tree. Grace ran toward her. Jonathan stood behind them, smiling. Victoria walked back to him and handed him a small envelope. Inside was a photograph from their first blind date. Jonathan laughed when he saw it. On the back, Victoria had written a simple sentence. The best things in life sometimes begin with the biggest misunderstandings. Jonathan looked at her and admitted that when he first saw her in the restaurant, he had tried to escape because he thought she was the last person in the world who could understand his life. Victoria smiled and reminded him that she had almost let him escape. Then she reached for his hand. Jonathan looked toward Grace, who was running through the grass, laughing beneath the summer sun. For years, he had believed that loving someone again would mean betraying the memory of his wife. But now he understood something. Love didn't erase the past. It honored it. His late wife would always be part of Grace's story, part of his story, and part of the family they had once dreamed of. But life had given him another chapter. And this time, he wasn't running. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs a little hope, and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes the people who look strongest are carrying the heaviest burdens, and sometimes all they need is one person willing to sit beside them and say, "You don't have to carry it alone." Before we reach the ending, I want to make one special request. Comment, "I believe in second chances," below if you believe that everyone deserves another opportunity to find happiness. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the Charlotte skyline, Jonathan watched Grace laughing beside Victoria. He realized that the greatest surprise of his life hadn't been discovering that his blind date was his CEO. It had been discovering that behind the powerful woman everyone feared was someone who understood his loneliness. And behind the exhausted single father everyone overlooked was a man who still had enough love left in his heart to begin again. Jonathan had tried to escape his CEO that night. Instead, he found the woman who would eventually become his greatest reason to stop running. And sometimes, that's how life works. The door we desperately try to close can be the very door through which our second chance walks in.